must offer you my utmost thanks, dear patron, for your patience with the delays in our reveal of the Spring 2022 Gourmet Garbage Anime Tasting Menu. Not only have we had our own issues moving locations, but with how frustratingly good all the anime's been this season, it's taken quite the effort to pull together a menu suitable for your remarkably discerning tastes. I mean, you really have no idea how frustrating it is to watch a show about a sexy golf hustler from the wrong side of the tracks trying to break the grip that the golf mafia has on her orphanage by winning a golf death game so she can finally go legit and play the girl she's got a lesbian rivalry crush on in the Pro Tour, only to have to exclude it as trash because it's so clearly fine art. You might think I could just go to my anime list and pick stuff out of their low-score bargain bin, but the people who put stuff in there have no idea what they're doing. They gave Estab Life a 5.5 just because the CG's kinda ugly, while completely ignoring the part where the heroes help a Yakuza boss run away from home so he can become a magical girl. It's a very fun and original show that deserves a better chance than it's been given, and that is so annoying for me. It was also supremely irritating going into Don't Hurt Me My Healer expecting some classically half-assed cliche RPG jokes and low-effort waifu pandering, only to discover a shockingly clever and subtle character-driven comedy where the real joke, which admittedly takes a sec to set in, so I don't blame anyone who missed it, is that the guy who thinks he's the straight man with common sense is actually a nut job who believes the world operates on RPG logic, when most of the monsters he's trying to slay out of fear are just normal dudes minding their own business. Definitely not a comedy anime for everybody, but folks of certain tastes will find it to be very unironically enjoyable, and that's not what you're here for at all. No, you're in the mood for a meal that'll make you feel nice and guilty, maybe a little sick if you're lucky, and despite the difficulty, we at Chez Garbage have you covered. This is the hottest trash of spring 2022, brought to you by Bookwalker. Bookwalker, if you're not familiar, is Kadokawa's official ebook store, where you can buy thousands of high-res, English translated manga and light novels to read on your phone, tablet, or PC. You probably already knew that, and maybe even that you can use the promo code BASEMENT at checkout for a 600 yen discount on any of those. But what you might not know is that that code stacks with any of their promotions and sales, and Bookwalker always has a sale on. For instance, their Relationship Goals promo, where you can get 30% coin back on Love After World Domination and Shikimori's Not Just a Cutie, runs to June 2nd, and right after that, for Best Friends Week, which is also Harem Week, you can get that same amount of coins back on Konosuba, Kimono Friends, Haganai, and so much smut. You have no idea. On that note, though, if you've been to more than one of these garbage tastings, you'll know that while we try to keep our menu varied and interesting from season to season, we do keep a few reliable favorites on rotation just so that we know everybody will leave happy. There's always going to be at least one harem on here, for instance, and this spring, that harem is a couple of cuckoos. The premise is simple. Nagi Umino, a straight-A student attending the top school in Tokyo despite coming from a poor family, has just found out that he was swapped at birth with another baby. On his way to meet the DNA donors, he bumps into this cute girl who looks like she's about to jump off a bridge, but is actually just faking it for attention on Instagram, as a way of getting back at her parents. See, while Nagi is finding himself with his past being suddenly redefined, Erika Amano, a semi-famous influencer from a very rich family, is having her future stolen away from her by way of an arranged marriage, and this is her best idea as to how to lash out about that. But after talking to Nagi, she has a better one. Pretend this guy's her boyfriend so her folks will lay off. He doesn't really have the time for that, but he accidentally harem protagonisted into her boob earlier, and she caught that on camera, so she doesn't give him much of a choice. After some slice-of-lifey shenanigans, they do really hit it off, though, and they find a pic that's good enough to trick her dad into calling off the marriage. Or so they think. Unfortunately for her, that twist you imagined when I described those two scenarios back to back, but then immediately dismissed because that would be way too insane, even for a harem anime, is actually what's happening. Erika is the baby Nagi was swapped with, and both their parents have come to the conclusion that the best way to sort that whole mess out and give everybody the children that they raised and the children they wanted is to marry the both of them, so legally, everyone's parents. This does not sit well with the fiercely independent Erika, of course, who hates having stuff decided for her even though she kinda likes Nagi, and he's great at taking Insta photos. And it doesn't sit well with Nagi either, since the only reason he's a straight-A student in the first place is he's trying to impress Hiro Segawa, the hottest, smartest girl at his school, who we will later learn is also in an arranged marriage. And it really doesn't sit well with his adoring little sister Sachi, whose brain is just starting to connect the dots between some of the trashier romance manga she's enjoyed and the whole we're not actually blood-related thing. So that's already pretty complicated, and it's only made more complicated by the fact that Erika's dad is a stupid rich hotel magnate who can afford to just set aside an entire mansion in the heart of Tokyo for his child and his other estranged child to shack up in. It's an utterly ludicrous concept, even by harem anime standards, but the comedy of errors that ensues from it all is fairly entertaining, I must admit. The characters have really strong personalities that balance against each other well, not just with Nagi. The whole group has chemistry, and you're guaranteed a laugh when they hang out in pretty much any conceivable formation. Though the romantic half of the romantic comedy equation is pretty weak. It's nowhere near the same tier of harem comedy as, say, quintessential quintuplets or even nisekoi, but if this particular kind of trash is your kind of trash, or if you like getting into very technical arguments about what does and doesn't count as incest, it's probably worth a watch. I give it 3 dumpsters full of D-grade dating sims and Kentucky law books, lightly smoldering. Of course, this wouldn't be a proper garbage tasting menu without at least one isekai as well, and this season, that isekai is Trapped in a Dating Sim. The world of otome games is tough for mobs, which follows an ordinary Japanese geek guy whose little sister asks him to 100% a girl-oriented dating sim with RPG elements that she's been struggling with. And even though he hates the game and the asshole dudes he's supposed to hit on with a burning passion, he diligently devotes his entire spring break to clearing it for her, leaving himself so sleep-deprived in the process that when he finally goes to the store for dinner, he immediately trips down the stairs and dies. Then he wakes up in hell, by which I mean the world of that otome game, where he must find a way to survive as an unimportant background character at the same magic academy where all the dangerous main character bullshit that he really doesn't want to get involved in is happening. The show's setting is a mishmash of some of my personal all-time favorite anime aesthetics. You got a fantasy world made up of floating islands in the sky with knights fighting in Magitech combat mechs based on ancient lost technology that comes from a fallen, full-on sci-fi civilization whose AI remnants are still hidden beneath the floating Earth. Of course, it's one thing to simply come up with a cool fantasy aesthetic, and another entirely to actually develop that concept into a believable, living world in which your story can take place. But the fun thing about this anime is it doesn't even try. You see, Trapped in a Dating Sim isn't set in a real place, it's set in a dating sim. A kind of bad one, made by people who knew that as long as they put hot boys in it, no one would really pay that much attention to the world's backstory details. So, canonically, the lore is just kinda half-assed and we have to live with it. Which I'm happy to do because, like I said, these are some of my all-time favorite anime aesthetics mishmashed together. But you know what is shockingly well thought out? The aristocratic political system that governs this world. It's not that different from aristocracies in our own world, really, save for the small distinctions that each duchy and barony is located on its own floating island, and that women hold all the power. Which means that men, like our strapping young adventurer of a protagonist, have pretty much only one possible career path open to them if they want a halfway decent life. Marry someone rich while they're still young and hot, and pray that their new partner doesn't turn out to be an abusive monster. So it's actually a full-on inversion of gender roles that shows dudes what being treated like an object feels like, and not just a generic fantasy setting where the queen's chair is bigger than the king's, like S.H.I.E.L.D. Heroes matriarchy. And in keeping with that, a significant chunk of the plot is dedicated to our hero learning how to throw a decent tea party as he struggles to find a wife. It even takes priority over his dungeon delving classes, and the tea party instructor ends up becoming his manliest of manly role models. Of course, that dynamic doesn't last. It's an anime and people want to see giant robot fights, and by the end of the first arc, Leon's kicking all the pretty boys' asses in mech fights to defend the honor of a spurned lady in an elaborate social display that paints him as the villain society needs. And while he's doing that, the hot, rich student council president and a kindly poor girl with a heart of gold cheer him on from the sidelines. Later, the two will bathe together and talk about how great he is. So basically, it's my teenage rom-com snafu, but with mechs and fantasy skylands. It's quite self-indulgent and wish-fulfilling harem-adjacent stuff, really. Unconventional, but ultimately right in line with your typical isekai power fantasy experience. It is pretty clever how the show gets there, though. Leon's encyclopedic game knowledge doesn't actually help him that much because men are so oppressed that he can hardly take advantage of it beyond getting a giant robot and spaceship to be his servants. The best life he can reasonably hope for is one where he just gets to fade into the background and not be bothered by anyone powerful. But the thing is, he's not the only reincarnated student at the school, and the other one, a girl, has memorized all of the pickup lines from the game and is using them to turn the full husbando lineup into her own eternally loyal harem. This has the side effect of leaving the original protagonist and the antagonist of the game displaced from their own stories, with nothing else to do but form a harem around our hero, no matter how much unwanted attention that brings him. Trapped in a Dating Sim takes itself just the right level of seriously, where it's able to say and do genuinely interesting things and build up genuinely interesting three-dimensional characters, while also shamelessly indulging in pretty much every power fantasy trope under the sun, and somehow making it feel kind of subversive and original. Honestly, I'm not even sure it's right to call it trash, but it does have enough titty to qualify, and I wanted to highlight it here since I think I dropped the ball by not recommending it in the ones to watch. It's seriously a good time. I give this anime one dumpster full of gunpla kits and fancy tea bags with flames erupting 5 feet from its mouth and emitting an oddly pleasant smelling smoke. Now, speaking of isekai, if you're wondering what the S.H.I.E.L.D. hero's been up to since he returned this season, the answer to that is fighting this big turtle. Not preparing to fight it, not traveling to get to the fight, not even struggling in an epic, drawn-out, multi-episode battle to kill the darn thing against all odds. No, they manage that in the first episode of the fight. But then it gets back up. Again. And again. And again. Imagine if the white whale part of ReZero was just the whale with none of the witch cult stuff, or the politics, or the personal growth on Subaru's part, but also its endless 8 from Haruhi. This is like 3 times worse than what you're picturing, and that was before the anime production committee got to it. Apparently, this stretch of the source material is widely considered to be boring for some reason, but it's also too plot essential to skip, and you'd need to change a ton to fix it, so instead, they just sped it up to get back to the parts fans actually want to see as fast as possible. However, in the process, they took something that was once merely tedious and transformed it into a nigh unwatchable jumble of fast-forward info dumps and quarter-assed fight scenes, thus ensuring that a sizable chunk of their casual audience will never get to those parts because the show got bad and they dropped it. And it doesn't help that since Naofumi's name was cleared, the show's basically turned into the riding of the dick hero like every other isekai. There's also a new girl in the squad, because of course there is. It's a new season of an isekai anime. What are they gonna do? Not expand the harem? Rishia is an extremely clumsy and insecure type of moe blob, and she wants now Fumi to teach her how to be strong so she can fight alongside Itsuki, the bow hero, whom she has a crush on. This is, by isekai standards, astoundingly deep, complex, and unconventional character writing. I mean, a girl having an interest in a guy who's not the protagonist? How's the audience supposed to project themselves onto that? Shield Hero cleverly dodges this thorny issue by making Rishia deeply, agonizingly irritating to the point that nobody would want to waifu her, a trait only amplified by the fact that we skipped the non-plot essential training arc that was supposed to make us sympathize with her. Instead, our first real introduction to her is when she and the gang go to the slave trader in order to make her now Fumi's slave. Voluntarily, of course, for the slavery EXP buff, you see, which she needs due to her unusually low growth rate, which is holding back her otherwise once in 1,000 generations potential as a martial arts prodigy. Though until that problem is solved, she is able to fight alongside our heroes and harness some of that potential by wearing high-level fursuits that give her lots of stat bonuses. I swear I am not making a word of this up. If the first season of Shield Hero was 3 dumpsters full of flaming Bud Light boxes, then season 2 is all that plus 1 budget fursuit trash compacted into a small, inert cube of dull gray aluminum and then placed inside an equally dull gray aluminum trash can. Now we are no longer speaking of isekai, though to the untrained eye it will be hard to tell. The world's greatest demon king gets reincarnated as a typical nobody is a fantasy anime based on a light novel where that thing in the title happens, except for the last part, because the demon king Varvatos actually gets reincarnated as a super strong, cool, and important guy who all the women are throwing themselves at all the time. And that cool, strong, and important guy's name is Ard Meteor.
What a stupid, phony, made-up name.
The reason that Ard wants to be a typical nobody in the first place is because in his old life as Varvatos, he was way too strong, and obviously nobody wants to be friends with strong people because they're so scary, so he was very lonely. And at first, when he's a kid, he still has trouble making friends because he's so awkward that they run away from him as soon as he opens his mouth. But luckily, his parents are friends with this elf baron guy whose daughter is also really lonely, and she's scared of being friends for reasons unrelated to how strong he is at first, but then he kills some monsters that were gonna kill her, so she becomes his friend, and they're best friends, and they're probably gonna get married one day. And then they go to a magic school together where, on account of that incident and the reputation it gave him for being a super strong and cool and important guy, everyone wants to be his friend now, because obviously you want to be friends with a strong person so they can protect you from scary stuff. And you might think that contradicts the initial premise of the story, but shut up! Anyway, the only 2 friends who actually matter for plot purposes, and also plot purposes, are Irina, the cute, innocent elf girl who is his childhood friend, and Ginny, a succubus girl with no self-confidence who they save from this rich bully who treats her like property, and then they take her down to a dungeon to teach her speed magic, and after that, she has all the self-confidence, because that's how character arcs work. And she mainly uses that confidence to advocate for Ard getting himself a harem, because she thinks he'd look really good with a bunch of hoes hanging off of him, which Irina is vehemently opposed to, though that mostly seems to be on principle because she clearly wants it, and she clearly would not mind if Ginny watched. But she had better get used to the idea, and fast, because when her other best friend, who she has even though she's not supposed to have any friends, who is the queen, decides to reward Ard for saving the city from some demons who showed up around the time demons are supposed to show up in this kind of story, the way she decides to reward him is by having his baby, which she announces to her entire court within about 2 minutes of meeting him. him. But actually, though, Irina doesn't have to worry about her because that's a fake queen, and Irina is actually the secret shadow queen of the country who has to hide her identity because she's a descendant of the evil gods who the Demon King killed to make the world good before he reincarnated. But even though he himself is that Demon King, Ard doesn't stop being her friend when he hears that secret, because why would he? That's stupid. They've been friends for years. Obviously, that trumps some minor backstory detail when you actually know. You know what? This whole anime is stupid. It's just a dumber, hornier, exponentially boringer misfit at Demon King Academy that lacks the gumption to make its overpowered protagonist overpowered enough to loop back to being interesting again. I give it 4 industrial waste skips full of a complete printed list in 8-point font of all the things that would have been a better use of my time lightly smoldering. On the subject of such things, if you have actually good taste in actually good anime, like some kind of freak, then you know your boy Kong Ming, the tale of ancient China's greatest military mind becoming a modern-day music producer, is one of the best, most funnest, and originalist shows this season. That said, you don't need to miss out on the thrills of Three Kingdoms conflict in modern-day Tokyo just because you prefer your anime with a more pungent, aged flavor and flies buzzing around it. For you see, this spring has also brought with it the revival of a cultured classic battle manga franchise that I once treasured as a young lad. Specifically, the kind of hidden treasure that we used to stash under the mattress in the days before the internet. Ikitozen, or Battle Vixens as it's known stateside, tells the tale of sacred Magatama jewels containing the souls and powers of great Chinese warriors that have made their way to Japan over the years and now rest in the destined hands of those warriors' reincarnations, who are about to fight in an epic battle between countless high school delinquents, all using amazing martial arts abilities mostly to tear each other's clothes off. Shin Ikitozen is the sequel to that series, following Sonken Chubo, the meek little sister of original series heroine Hakufu Sonsaku, as she learns to navigate the labyrinthine world of mystically motivated sexy delinquent street brawls and awaken her true potential as a fighter. So far, so cliched, but what really set Ikitozen apart from other battle manga back in the day is the care and attention that it pays to small details like the precise anatomy of the areola, and also the extreme minutiae of Romance of the Three Kingdoms lore, of course. There's a lot of names in that book, and every single one of them corresponds to a horny, battle-hungry high school student with something to prove somewhere in Tokyo. This story is an intricate web of strategic alliances and delinquent power structures made up of dozens upon dozens of named major players with distinct personalities and powers and costumes that pander to very specific fetishes, all rooted in real historical fact, especially the fetish stuff. And let me tell you, if you're not also a high school student in Tokyo, or at least somewhere that has Chinese history on its curriculum, you are gonna have no earthly idea what any of that shit means, and the series will not lift one finger to help you, because all of its fingers are currently busy either guiding a pen down the sharp lines of an explosively powerful kick and into the subtle curves of a not-so-subtle panty peek, or, doing something else that fingers do under the table. So if you're concerned that you'd be confused jumping into a sequel instead of starting with the original, you are absolutely right to be. But I've read way more of this than I'd care to admit, and I still have no idea what the fuck is going on, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. It's not what you're here for anyway. You're here because you want to see some slick fight animations and one of those classic, intense martial arts death glares way off in the distance behind a close-up shot of an entire ass. Also, those fight animations come with a heaping side of floppy titties. The story here is pretty much irrelevant, though for what it's worth, it is also hilariously over the top. Lots of people kick buildings until they explode. It's a good time. I give Shin Ikitozen 4 waste paper baskets full of crumpled, blood-stained tissues and panties, burning with an aura of ferocious fighting intensity, but no actual fire because there are way too many fluids in there for that to be physically possible. And not just the 2 you're thinking of. With that, we've reached the bottom of tonight's barrel. I hope you've enjoyed your slop. That said, there is another dinner party arriving any moment now, and we do only have the 1 chair, so please leave now. If this place had doors, I'd tell you not to let them hit you on the way out. I'm Geoff Thew, your garbage guru, and seriously, get out now. Look, I know we're serving literal garbage in a back alley here, but it's imported garbage in a Vancouver back alley, so our margins are razor thin and we really can't afford loitering. If you absolutely must hang around, just go watch them slow roast the rising of the Shield hero at the fancy restaurant next door we steal all our plates from. Bye!